Zaxthor stood at the podium, his tentacles quivering with what his species considered laughter. The class of interstellar exchange students before him was a motley crew of beings from across the galaxy, each more bizarre than the last, but none quite as perplexing as the lone human in the front row. And for your final assignment, Zaxthor gurgled, his speech sacs inflating with mirth. You will each wrestle the deadliest creature on your home planet and write a report on the experience. He paused for dramatic effect, expecting gasps of horror or at least a few fainting spells. Instead, the human Jake was his name raised his hand with an enthusiasm that made Zaxthor's eye stalks twitch nervously. Yes, Jake, the professor asked, dreading the response. So, when you say deadliest creature, are we talking pound for pound or just overall body count? Because that makes a big difference back on Earth. The rest of the class turned to stare at Jake, their various appendages and sensory organs expressing a mix of confusion and terror. Zaxthor's tentacles drooped. He'd forgotten about Earth's classification as a death world. This assignment was supposed to be impossible, a joke to lighten the mood before giving them the real final project. Zaxthor stammered, his chromatophore cycling through a rainbow of uncertainty. Jake grinned, a gesture that sent shivers through half the class. No worries, prof. I'll figure it out. This is going to be awesome. As the human bounded out of the classroom, Zaxthor couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a terrible mistake. Jake's roommate, Blorp, was a gelatinous mass of semi-sentient goo from the planet Glopeter VI. As Jake packed his bag for the trip back to Earth, Blorp oozed anxiously around the room. You can't seriously be going through with this, Blorp burbled, his worry manifesting as tiny bubbles on his surface. Jake zipped up his duffel bag and turned to his amorphous friend. Come on, Blorp, where's your sense of adventure? I left it in the primordial soup I evolved from, Blorp replied dryly, along with my survival instinct, apparently. Look, Jake said, patting Blorp on what he assumed was a shoulder. It was actually a waste excretion port. But Blorp appreciated the gesture nonetheless. It's not like I'm going to wrestle a grizzly bear or anything. I've got a plan. Blorp's entire form shuddered. That's what worries me. Your plans tend to end with explosions or property damage. Remember the great cafeteria incident? Jake winced. Okay, in my defense, how was I supposed to know that Zentarian spices were also high-grade explosives? It was written on the label, Blorp exclaimed, his gelatinous form rippling with exasperation. Yeah, in Zentarian. I'm still learning the squiggles, Jake protested. He hefted his bag onto his shoulder. Anyway, this time it's foolproof. I'm going to wrestle the deadliest creature on Earth, and I'll be back before you know it. As Jake strode out of the room, Blorp oozed after him, leaving a trail of worried slime. At least tell me what you're planning to wrestle. Jake's laughter echoed down the hallway. Where's the fun in that? You'll find out when I get back. Blorp retreated to his corner of the room, preparing himself for a long, anxious wait. He had a feeling he'd be stress-budding for days. Back on Earth, Jake stood in his parents' backyard, hands on his hips, surveying the scene before him. His mother peered out the kitchen window, a mixture of resignation and amusement on her face. Honey, she called out, are you sure about this? Your father and I support your interstellar education, but this seems a bit extreme. Jake turned and flashed her a confident grin. Mom, trust me. I've got this all figured out. It's for science. His mother sighed. That's what you said about the rocket-powered skateboard incident. This is totally different, Jake assured her. For one thing, there's no rocket fuel involved. Small mercies, his mother muttered, retreating from the window. Jake turned back to the task at hand. Before him stood a makeshift arena, cobbled together from old fence panels, chicken wire, and what appeared to be a kiddie pool filled with mud. In the center of this DIY gladiatorial pit sat a small cardboard box, holes punched in the sides, emitting an ominous buzzing sound. Jake cracked his knuckles, a manic gleam in his eye. All right, you little terrors. Let's dance. With the flourish of a stage magician revealing his grand illusion, Jake flipped open a cardboard box. A cloud of angry insects erupted from within, their tiny bodies glinting menacingly in the afternoon sun. Mosquitoes, hundreds of them. Jake dove into the muddy kiddie pool, rolling around to coat himself in a thick layer of sludge. The mosquitoes, drawn by the heat of his body and the carbon dioxide from his exaggerated breathing, swarmed towards him. Come at me, you microscopic vampires, Jake taunted, flailing his arms in what he imagined was an intimidating manner. To any outside observer, it looked more like he was having a seizure in a mud bath while being attacked by invisible assailants. The mosquitoes, unimpressed by Jake's bravado, began their assault. But as they tried to land on him, they found themselves stuck in the thick mud coating his body. Jake laughed maniacally, rolling around in the pool, trapping more and more of the tiny terrors. You think you're Earth's deadliest creature, he cackled. You may have the highest body count, but you've never faced a human with a GPA to protect. From the kitchen window, Jake's father joined his mother in watching the spectacle unfold in their backyard. Should we do something, he asked hesitantly. Jake's mother shook her head, a mix of pride and exasperation on her face. No, dear. This is just what happens when you raise a Deathworlder. As Jake continued his mud-caked battle against the mosquito horde, his parents retreated to the living room, pointedly ignoring the sounds of splashing, maniacal laughter, and the occasional cry of "Take that, you six-legged syringes." Some things they decided were best left to the realm of plausible deniability. 3 hours, 2 mud refills, and one very confused neighborhood dog later, Jake stood triumphant in the center of his backyard. The muddy kiddie pool was now a mosquito graveyard, littered with the tiny corpses of his vanquished foes. Jake himself looked like some sort of swamp monster caked in dried mud and sporting an impressive collection of bug bites on the few patches of exposed skin. And that he announced to no one in particular is how you wrestle the deadliest creature on Earth. His mother cautiously approached, armed with a garden hose. "Honey, I'm very proud of your creative problem solving, but you're not coming back in the house like that." Jake struck a heroic pose, which was somewhat undermined by a glob of mud falling from his elbow. "Mom, I just single-handedly defeated more mosquitoes than any human in history. I am the champion of Earth, defender against the tiny bloodsuckers that have plagued humanity since time immemorial." His mother nodded patiently. "Yes, dear. And champions get hosed down in the backyard before they're allowed near the carpet." As the cold water hit him, Jake let out a yelp that was decidedly less heroic than his previous declarations. "Hey, a little warning next time." "Consider it your victory shower," his mother replied, a mischievous glint in her eye as she adjusted the nozzle to jet setting. Once Jake was sufficiently demudded and looking more human than swamp beast, he wrapped himself in a towel and sat on the back porch steps. His father joined him, handing him a steaming mug of hot chocolate. "So his dad began, want to tell me why our backyard looks like the set of a low-budget monster movie." Jake took a sip of his cocoa, wincing as it aggravated one of his many mosquito bites. "It's for school. Dad, we had to wrestle the deadliest creature on our home planet." His father nodded sagely. "Ah, yes, the age-old academic tradition of mud wrestling insects. I remember it well from my college days." Dad, Jake groaned. "I'm serious. Earth is classified as a death world out there. Our professor thought he was giving us an impossible task, but he didn't count on human ingenuity. Or human stubbornness," his father added with a chuckle. "You know, when I was your age, the craziest thing I did for school was pull an all-nighter to finish a term paper." Jake grinned. "Well, times have changed, Dad. Now we pull all-nighters to figure out how to battle microscopic killers in our own backyard." His father shook his head, a mix of amusement and pride on his face. "Just promise me one thing, Jake." "What's that?" "Next time you have to wrestle deadly Earth creatures for homework, maybe choose something that won't leave quite so many itchy souvenirs." Jake laughed, then immediately regretted it as he discovered yet another mosquito bite on his neck. "Deal, though, I have to say. This is going to make one hell of a report." Back at the Intergalactic Academy of Xenobiology and really weird stuff, Professor Zaxthor was having a nervous breakdown. His tentacles were tied in knots, his chromatophores stuck on a sickly green, and he'd stress molted twice in the past hour. The cause of his distress sat on his desk, a 50-page report, bound in what appeared to be dried mud, with the title "How I Became Earth's Mightiest Mosquito Wrestler. A Human's Guide to Hugging Death with a Muddy Embrace." Zaxthor's teaching assistant, a hyper-intelligent shade of blue named Cerulean, hovered nearby. "Sir, you really should read it. It's quite enlightening." "Enlightening?" Zaxthor gurgled incredulously. The human was supposed to fail spectacularly. This assignment was a joke. A bit of end-of-term levity before the real final exam. "And now I have to grade this monstrosity." Cerulean's hue deepened thoughtfully. "Well, sir, technically he did complete the assignment, and quite thoroughly, I might add. There's an entire chapter dedicated to the aerodynamics of mosquito flight in relation to mud viscosity." Zaxthor's eye stalks drooped in defeat. Fine, I'll read it. But if I find a single mention of human superiority or hold my beer, I'm retiring to become a space trucker." As the professor begrudgingly began to read, his expression cycled through disbelief, horror, reluctant admiration, and finally, a sort of resigned amusement. By the time he reached the conclusion, which included a mud-spattered photo of Jake giving a thumbs up while covered in what appeared to be the remnants of a mosquito apocalypse, Zaxthor found himself chuckling, despite his best efforts. "Cerulean," he said, setting down the report, "I believe we may need to reconsider our classification of Earth as a death world." The blue entity pulsed curiously. "You mean downgrade it, sir?" Zaxthor's tentacles waved dismissively. No. I mean, we might need to create an entirely new category, something beyond death world. Perhaps. Realm of the clinically insane but somehow still alive. As if on cue, Jake burst into the office, his face beaming with excitement and spotted with what looked suspiciously like fresh mosquito bites. "Professor, I hope you enjoyed my report. I was thinking for extra credit, how about I demonstrate my mosquito wrestling technique live in class? I brought my own mud." Zaxthor's eye stalks retracted in horror, and he briefly considered the merits of a midlife career change to space piracy. Anything seemed preferable to unleashing Jake's particular brand of human ingenuity on an unsuspecting universe. But as he looked at the eager face of his human student, Zaxthor felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation. After all, isn't this what education was about? Pushing boundaries, challenging assumptions, and occasionally covered in mud. With a resigned sigh that sounded like a deflating balloon, Zaxthor nodded. Very well, Jake, but please, for the love of all that's gelatinous and slimy in this universe, keep the mud inside the classroom this time. Jake's answering whoop of joy sent Cerulean swirling in panic and caused Zaxthor to seriously reconsider his life choices. As the human dashed off to prepare for his demonstration, the professor turned to his quivering assistant. Cerulean, be a dear and alert the janitorial staff, and perhaps the medical bay. Oh, and the psychology department, I have a feeling we'll all need therapy after this. As the sounds of Jake's enthusiastic preparation echoed down the hallway, Zaxthor couldn't help but wonder, was it too late to transfer to that nice, quiet black hole research station on the edge of the galaxy? But deep down, beneath the layers of exasperation and mild terror, a small part of him was curious. After all, how often does one get to witness the wrestling techniques of a species crazy enough to pick fights with the deadliest creatures on a death world? Zaxthor straightened his posture, his tentacles regaining some of their usual perkiness. If humans could face down swarms of miniature flying death needles with nothing but mud and moxie, surely he could survive one more class with Jake. Probably. Maybe. He made a mental note to update his will, just in case. The day of Jake's extra credit demonstration arrived with all the subtlety of a supernova in a glitter factory. The classroom was abuzz with anticipation, quite literally in some cases, as several of the more insectoid students vibrated with excitement. Zaxthor stood at the front of the room. His tentacles knotted around a stress ball shaped like a tiny planet which, coincidentally, bore a striking resemblance to Earth. Now, class, he began, his voice only slightly higher pitched than usual. Today we have a special presentation from our resident Deathworlder, Jake. The room erupted in a cacophony of alien sounds, clicks, whistles, burbles, and one particularly enthusiastic blue orb from the back row. Jake swaggered to the front of the classroom, pulling behind him a wagon filled with suspicious-looking equipment, a kiddie pool, several buckets of mud, and a large, ominously buzzing box. Greetings, sentient beings of all shapes, sizes, and states of matter, Jake announced, his grin wide enough to make several of his classmates flinch. Today, I'm going to show you how we humans tackle the deadliest creature on our planet, the mosquito. A tentative appendage raised from the middle of the room. It belonged to Zilxer, a being composed entirely of crystalline structures. Excuse me, Zilxer chimed quite literally, but I was under the impression that Earth harbored far more dangerous fauna. What about your bears or hippopotamuses? Jake's grin, if possible, grew even wider. Ah, excellent question. You see, while bears and hippos are indeed dangerous, they can't hold a candle to the mosquito when it comes to human deaths per year. These tiny terrors are responsible for more human casualties than any other creature on Earth. A collective gasp rippled through the classroom. Zaxthor felt a migraine coming on in all three of his brains. But fear not, Jake continued, oblivious to his professor's growing distress. For I, Jake of Earth, have developed a foolproof method for wrestling these miniature menaces. With a flourish that would have made a stage magician proud, Jake whipped the cover off the buzzing box. A cloud of mosquitoes erupted into the classroom, their tiny wings creating a sound not unlike 1,000 angry dentist drills. Several students screamed. A few fainted. Blorp, who had come to watch his roommate's presentation, began to dissolve in panic. Now watch and learn, Jake shouted over the chaos. He dove into the kiddie pool filled with mud, rolling around like a pig in, well, mud. The class watched in horrified fascination as Jake, now resembling a sentient mud monster, began to flail his arms wildly. The mosquitoes, drawn by the heat and carbon dioxide, swarmed towards him. You see, Jake explained, his voice muffled by the mud, the key is to become one with the mud. Embrace it. Be the mud. Zaxthor, who had retreated behind his desk, peeked out cautiously. Jake, he gurgled, I'm not sure this is quite what I had in mind for a classroom demonstration. But Jake was in his element. He rolled, he flailed, he made mud angels on the classroom floor. All the while, mosquitoes dive-bombed him, only to find themselves stuck in the thick layer of muck covering the human. And now, Jake announced, standing up with a squelch, for my final trick. He reached into the wagon and pulled out what looked like a modified leaf blower. Before anyone could stop him, Jake flipped the switch. A hurricane of air erupted from the device, blowing the remaining mosquitoes into a specially prepared containment field. The force of the wind also splattered mud across the entire classroom, coating students, desks, and one very disgruntled professor in a fine layer of earth soil. As the dust and mud settled, Jake stood in the center of the room, arms raised in triumph. And that, my extraterrestrial friends, is how you wrestle the deadliest creature on Earth. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft plop of mud dripping from the ceiling. Then, from the back of the room, came a single, enthusiastic blue orb. It was quickly followed by a smattering of alien applause, clicks, and whistles. Zaxthor emerged from behind his desk, looking like a swamp creature from a B-movie. His eye stalks swiveled to survey the mud-coated disaster that was once his classroom. Then, to everyone's surprise, including his own, he began to laugh. It started as a low gurgle and grew into a full tentacled guffaw. Soon the entire class joined in, their various forms of laughter creating a symphony of alien mirth. Well, Jake Zaxthor finally managed, wiping a muddy tear from one eye stalk. I must admit that was educational. Lol. Jake beamed, mud cracking on his face as he smiled. Thank you, Professor. So, do I get the extra credit? Zaxthor looked around at his mud-spattered students, all buzzing some literally with excitement. He sighed, a sound like air escaping from a balloon. Yes, Jake, you get the extra credit, and a bill from the janitorial department, I suspect. As the class began to file out, leaving muddy footprints and in some cases slime trails behind them, Zaxthor found himself reevaluating his understanding of humans. They were indeed a species from a death world, but perhaps their greatest weapon wasn't their strength or their technology. Perhaps it was their utterly insane approach to problem solving. Watching Jake attempt to high-five his gelatinous roommate resulting in more of a high splat, Zaxthor made a mental note. Next semester, stick to written assignments only. The universe might not survive another hands-on human demonstration, but as he squelched his way to the faculty lounge for a much-needed cup of hyper coffee, Zaxthor couldn't help but feel a twinge of excitement. After all, with humans in the class, one thing was certain. Life at the Intergalactic Academy would never be boring again. News of Jake's Mosquito wrestling exploits spread through the Academy faster than a Zorgak space rabbit on rocket skates. By the end of the day, the story had grown to mythic proportions. Some said Jake had single-handedly defeated an entire planet of mosquitoes. Others claimed he had mud-wrestled a mosquito the size of a small moon. In the student lounge, a group of aliens from various corners of the galaxy huddled around Blorp, eager for first-hand details of the mud-spattered spectacle. So chittered X-Zix, an arachnoid being from the Andromeda galaxy. Is it true that humans consider mosquitoes more dangerous than their fearsome grizzly bears? Blorp oozed thoughtfully, forming a mouth-like aperture to speak. Well, according to Jake, mosquitoes are responsible for more human deaths due to the diseases they carry. But personally, I think humans just enjoy the challenge of fighting opponents several billion times smaller than themselves. A collective murmur of amazement rippled through the group. But why mud? Asked Luminara, a bioluminescent cephalopod. Surely their advanced technology could produce a more effective mosquito deterrent. Blorp's entire form rippled in what passed for a shrug among his species. Humans have a saying, when all you have is mud, everything looks like a mosquito wrestling arena or something like that. I'm still learning their idioms. Meanwhile, in the faculty lounge, Professor Zaxthor was regaling his colleagues with the tale of Jake's presentation, his tentacles gesticulating wildly as he recounted the mud-splattered chaos. And then he gurgled, pausing for dramatic effect. He pulled out this device, a leaf blower he called it, and created a veritable mud NATO in the classroom. Professor Yizix, a gaseous entity contained within a shimmering force field, pulsed with curiosity. Fascinating. And you say this is a common Earth pest control method? Zaxthor's eye stalks drooped in exhaustion. Honestly, at this point I'm afraid to ask. Every time I think I understand humans, they do something like this and turn my entire worldview upside down. As the professors debated the merits and pitfalls of human ingenuity, Jake found himself in the Academy's communications center, facing a very excited and very muddy hologram of his parents. Oh honey, his mother's hologram flickered. We're so proud. Your father's already told the whole neighborhood about your mosquito wrestling triumph. Jake grinned sheepishly. Thanks, Mom, though I think Dad might be exaggerating a bit. I didn't actually save the entire galaxy from a mosquito invasion. His father's hologram chimed in. Not yet, son. But at the rate you're going, I wouldn't rule it out. As Jake chatted with his parents, regaling them with tales of alien reactions in the great classroom mudsplosion, he felt a warm glow of satisfaction. Sure, he might be a Deathworlder among the stars, but he was their Deathworlder. And if that meant occasionally covering himself in mud to prove a point about Earth's deadliest creatures, well, that was just part of the job. Little did Jake know his muddy mosquito wrestling antics were about to catapult him to intergalactic fame. But that, as they say, is a story for another day, one likely involving more mud, more bugs, and at least one exasperated alien professor questioning his career choices. For now, Jake was content in the knowledge that he'd not only completed his assignment but had also given his extraterrestrial classmates a glimpse into the wonderfully weird world of human problem solving. And really, isn't that what intergalactic education is all about? As he bid goodbye to his parents and headed back to his dorm room, Jake couldn't help but wonder what his next assignment might bring. Whatever it was, he was sure of one thing: it would be an adventure. Because when you're a human in an alien academy, every day is an opportunity to show the universe just how delightfully strange Earth can be. And who knows? Maybe next semester he'd get to wrestle something a bit bigger. A hippo, perhaps. Jake grinned at the thought. He'd need a bigger mud pit for that one. As the dust and mud settled on Jake's infamous mosquito wrestling demonstration, life at the Intergalactic Academy of Xenobiology and really weird stuff slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be with a human in attendance. Jake's exploits had earned him a reputation as the go-to expert on Earth's deadly fauna, much to Professor Zaxthor's chagrin. Students from across the galaxy would seek him out, eager to learn more about the Death World and its inhabitants. So Jake, a crystalline being, chimed one day in the cafeteria, "What's the next deadliest creature on Earth after mosquitoes?" Jake grinned, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Well, there's always the hippopotamus, but wrestling one of those might require a slightly larger mud pit." From across the room, Zaxthor's eye stalks twitched nervously. He made a mental note to reinforce the classroom walls just in case. As for Jake, he continued to approach his alien education with the same muddy enthusiasm that had made him a legend. Whether it was dissecting space slugs or cataloging cosmic flora, he tackled each assignment with a uniquely human blend of ingenuity, recklessness, and a liberal application of Earth-based solutions. And so the legend of the Mosquito wrestler of Earth grew, spreading across the stars like ripples in a giant, intergalactic mud puddle. In the great tapestry of the universe, Jake had added a distinctly muddy, uniquely human thread, proof that sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to dive in headfirst, even if it means getting a little dirty in the process. As Jake often said, with a wink and a mud-spattered grin, "In space, no one can hear you squelch." And that, dear readers, is how a human turned mosquito wrestling into an intergalactic sensation, one mud pit at a time.